HumanX Ventures presents Inside the Coaching Mind. Terry Pettit coached the University of Nebraska's first national championship team in 1995 and put the state of Nebraska on a path to volleyball greatness. Now, Terry mentors coaches, writes books, and gives talks about leadership and team building to corporate and business audiences. Here's Coach Pettit to take us inside the coaching mind.
Thank you, David Young, and I also want to thank Brad Black and HumanX Ventures, an organization that recruits, mentors, and develops exceptional coaches and leaders. And Brad and HumanX will be hosting a community and leadership summit at Baxter Arena on June 25th and 26th in Omaha. Sue Enquist will be presenting there on developing team culture. I think I'll be leading a breakout with Bruce Rasmussen, the former AD at Creighton. And so if you want to hang out with, I think, some truly exceptional leaders, it's an event that perhaps you should consider. And we have an extraordinary leader as our guest today. Nickie Sanlin is the director of volleyball and the head men's volleyball coach at McKendree University. She's also this year's AVCA National Men's Coach of the Year. Her team tied for the conference championship in the Midwest Volleyball Athletics Conference, a conference that has the Ohio State and the Ball State and Loyola Chicago, a lot of really strong volleyball programs. For about 10 years, Nickie coached both the women's team and the men's team at McKendree. That just seems like an overwhelming task, not just the coaching and the training, but just relating to that number of people. So it's wonderful to have you as a guest today. I need to give a thanks to Don Shaw, the former Stanford men's and women's volleyball coach, who said, this is a lady that you need to have as a guest. And so I did my research, and it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome to Inside the Coaching Mind.
No, thank you for having me. No, this is very exciting. I'm honored.
Well, thank you. Nickie, I posted on our Facebook page or Facebook group that you were going to be a guest, and this gentleman named Jack McLean responded, and he said, I was part of Nickie's inaugural senior class in 2017. I grew up in Nebraska and played for and now coach for the longest running and only boys volleyball club in the state of Nebraska, the High Flyers Volleyball Club. I grew up watching mostly women play, of course the Huskers, with the goal of competing at the collegiate level. And because of the High Flyers and Nickie, I was able to reach that goal. Nickie is an incredible force for the growth of our sport, both on the men's and women's side. So proud of what she continues to accomplish and proud to be a part of her journey. Can't wait to listen in.
Yes, Jack was actually the first setter I ever recruited in the program. He was number one. Without him, we would not be here. So Jack, I love you. He sent me flowers this year. And I got to see him, and I'll see him a lot more. But that means a lot to being the only coach that some young men have ever known in this program, and having someone like Jack, who we've been through so much together. And wow, it's been almost 10 years since I'm gonna say I'm the same age when I started recruiting him. That's what I'm gonna say right now.
Well, that's wonderful. What town was he? Was he from Omaha?
Yes, and his parents actually started the club High Flyers, and he is an integral part of what they're doing right now. And his young man, he has a young man at Lewis University who's going to be great and entering the USA pipeline. And now it's some of the underserved communities. Obviously, Nebraska itself is huge in women's volleyball, but now they're starting to see some bright young men come out of the state.
Nickie, I just had a flashback to not a shining moment, but running a camp. I think we probably had 400 women in this week of volleyball camp, and I opened it up to men, and there were two men that came. And I remember walking past the dorm to go eat, and there was this sign in the window, "Hey, chicks, come up here for a good time."
Okay. All right. I love that.
Well, that's wonderful. You played at West Virginia for Mitch Jacobs. I sense that was more than a coach.
Yeah, he is. He is a family.
Can you talk about him? And the other thing is, from listening to, I want to thank the USA Volleyball for their podcast, because I listened to that podcast 3 times, just trying to sense for your story and who you are. But I sense that maybe you had an edge, or maybe were a tough kid to get through to, maybe when you went to college. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a very fair assessment. I don't know if I'd want to coach. I would coach me now because I'm the type of player that I would have recruited. Mitch was tough, and he only had tough kids on the team, so it's pretty much fitting. That's a very fair assessment.
Well, did he provide structure or discipline or some combination of both?
A combination of both. Actually, I claim him as my coach. I was recruited by Steffi Legal at Marshall in 2001, and I tore my ACL that first year. And then she was, I guess, let go as a head coach, and then Mitch came in, and I call him my coach. And he could have easily got rid of me. He never saw me play, but my mother is also a tough cookie, and said, "You're going to take care of my daughter." And I will never forget my first practice back. I tore it running a slide at NC State, and I think I probably ran 100 slides like the first day I was cleared, because he's like, "We're not going to have a problem right now. We're just going to do it." And that's all she wrote. He was tough. He took a team that was 4-26 his first year, the year before he got there, and turned them into a 21 team the second year. Played conference championship, regular season. He just complete turnaround. And I am a disciplined person, even though I ask for forgiveness sometimes. But he whipped us into shape. The standards were high, and then once we met those, we kept reaching it, kept raising the bar. And I actually talked to him when I won the Coach of the Year award, and he was, I was like, "I'm only here because of you and the values you instilled in me. You did this." I may or may not have been a brat at times, but if he said jump high, I said, how high are we going here? This is what we're doing, and everybody's going to listen. So I stayed every summer. I worked every camp with him. I didn't go home, and we became close that way. So it was a loving coach-player relationship where I love to hate him at times, but I am eternally grateful now.
How long did it take for that type of trust to develop?
I would probably say after the first year, we returned everyone, and he turned it into a 20-win season. And it was immediately, you don't have to like it. This is what we're doing, and I know what I'm talking about. And I was just like, yep, I'm in. I wanted to be pushed. I always believed in hard work. It was deep down in there, but a certain level of work, and I wanted to be great. And all the challenges that come with collegiate athletics, from social, emotional, physical injuries, he was right there and just kept pushing and saying, "You have more in the tank. If you like it or not, we're going to get there." A year is probably good.
Well, when I listened to your conversation on the USA podcast, I thought you were vulnerable, and I've always thought that vulnerability was critical to developing trust. Was that a quality that you valued early in your coaching career, or is that something that evolved, that you were as vulnerable as you are now?
It's evolved over time. I know at the beginning of my men's career, it was, I tell a lot of young women that you have to start with a tight fist, because they're puppies. They can smell fear. They're going to push you. They're going to, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to challenge you. They're going to see how far they can take it. But as the program started to grow and become better, and I was getting better recruits, I had to let that side of me of like, I'm not just the anomaly of a female coach anymore. I'm mom, sister, aunt, friend, you name it. I wear the hat. And there are a lot of moments that I share about my personal life that I've had young men on the side say like, oh, that's me too. You're not this mythical creature. And I'm like, oh, okay, this works. And I've had a lot of coaches tell me that's not the way, that's not how you do things. But here at my institution and my program, it works for us. We're family.
I have to think you have two children, Micah and Grace. I, I, I think for most of us that having kids helps with that vulnerability. I mean, because we don't have the answers and we're confronted with things every day. How old are those kids now, and are they involved in sports?
Grace is 17 and Micah's 15. So she's going to be a senior and Micah is going to be a sophomore. She is all the best things of me. She is not her competitive mother where I only wanted to play ball. She is my art child, and she just finished her last year club in 17s, and she's going to go to school and just be a great student. She wants to help people, which is awesome. And yeah, they grew up here. She actually this spring came to as many games and practices as possible, and was like, "Can you call me out of school?" I'm like, "I can't call you out to go to serve and pass. You can, So that's exciting for me that she is wanting. She's always been close because they grew up here, but now it's weird because she's the same age as some of the freshmen almost. So now it's a whole nother dynamic, and she wants to be involved, and that's exciting for me that I have turned in from, Mom, you're on YouTube, you're famous, to, hey, can I skip school to come to practice? So I guess it's a little different.
Yeah, I had a flashback to my own kids bumping balls in the hallways of the Coliseum. And I wasn't, I knew they were there, but I didn't know what they were doing.
Yep.
But just being around responsible women and seeing them every day, assertive women, I think helped them. How about your son, Micah? How's he doing?
He's great. I don't know if you've heard but my son's on the spectrum. He has a communication delay. He's extremely smart, and you would never give college guys credit for how they've helped him grow up from Jack's class and now where you see him in the hallway, you got to engage him, you have to help him practice his communication. It's kind of, he has 20 brothers that if somebody messes with him, they mess with them. Same thing with Grace. They used to take her to go get ice cream and do all these things with her. She has a pregame ritual that they would go get soda before the game, and I'm like, you can't take my car. But no, they take care of him. They help him grow up, and it's really exciting to see that. I talk to a lot of moms that are in the coaching game, and they're like, well, I can't be a great mom and a great coach. And I'm like, you can easily do both, because my kids would not change anything in the world for me to give up what I do here and, the impact that it has on their lives. Yes, I've been gone for weekends and birthdays and some events, but the impact the players have had on their lives is just immeasurable.
I assume you have some family support for that, though, when you're on the road. Is that accurate?
Yes, my mom and dad live 5 miles from me. I've been dating a wonderful gentleman for almost 5 years now, and he has a son who I claim as my own. And it literally takes a village. Grace has been on plenty of road trips. My dad retired, or Papa retired when my son was born. So he's like, I got to find a new part-time job. I'm like, you're Papa. That's your part-time job. That's what you're doing. When Grace would go to club tournaments, my mom or dad would go on the trip, and it was a big family affair. So I'm from the St. Louis area, so my entire family's here, and it just works.
Yeah. You became a head coach pretty quickly. I mean, you'd coached club and you were an assistant coach for a year or two, then you became the interim head coach. To me, that's the best pathway. Now, a lot of people, a lot of ADs, that I work with in hiring coaches say, I want I want the associate head coach at Stanford or Nebraska or whatever. And my response is look for somebody who's been a head coach, maybe at a junior college or Division II, because there's just so many things that you learn as a head coach that you don't learn as an assistant coach. Everything that goes wrong, the head coach has to deal with. Um, I'm guessing you had some of those things.
I The best way for me to learn was to be thrown to the fire immediately. A lot of failure getting here. I think people try to avoid failure. It's it's impossible. A lot of losses, player personnel, recruiting woes, hearing the word no as a head coach and not just as the assistant anymore, um, budgetary constraints, things like that. And what are you trying to match what you want to be successful with the administration? I was just thrown right in. There was no playbook. And for me, it was a tough road, but I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change. I have no regrets. I wouldn't be here right now if I would have just been handed something, or I don't want to say handed, but had a different path because I had to figure it out. There wasn't really many, especially on the men's side, there wasn't a female mentor. There were a lot of women coaches that I knew that coached women's volleyball, but I had 40 kids that all believed in me and they were all vying for my attention. I had to figure out what that balance looked like, how to admit if I dropped the ball. Um, one team over the other. There's no hierarchy here. But anytime if someone has an opportunity to just kind of figure it out for themselves, which is becoming less and less now, I tell them to do it. You have to figure out your own path, your own philosophy, your own style, and I think mine's pretty unique how I do things here, but that's all by trial and error.
If we saw the practice plan when you were coaching both teams, and we saw the practice plan for the men and the women, and let's say it's the first week of the season, what things would be similar and what things would be different?
Actually, a lot was the same. It was very, very similar. We stopped. I'd probably say my first or second year. I came from the land of we were barrel rolling, shoulder rolls. We were doing it all, and I had to learn how to dive really quickly, and me physically doing it myself because at that point in time I was running, lifting. I was in the trenches with the guys, where the girls were more established at that time, and they had an opportunity. And right now we have open practices where if they want to hang out and watch, they're more than welcome. I can vividly remember a young lady saying, "I want to do that. I want to run a BIC. What is a BIC?" And I'm like, "Well, actually," and we had a young lady who was in the Hall of Fame here. She was best player of McKendree history, and I had the privilege. She's from San Diego. She was like the first BIC attacker in our conference, and I can still see young women saying, "Do we block this? What do we do?" And it was just very transformative. Or right now, there's a young lady that I recruited that's still on the women's team, and we call her Professor Scoop because she learned how to scoop balls. And that was my last year. And she's just like, "You didn't tell me it was this easy." I'm like, "You don't see a ton of women scooping balls, but here's the reason why. This is why it's going to work for you." And she eats it. It's great. So there was not many differences, little nuances. Tempo's a little bit different, but otherwise physicality is different. But that's not something you plan in practice. But a lot of the same similarities of this is what we're doing. We have had a young man that ran a mean slide. People where it was a taboo. Lucas Galifos was hitting 875 on the slide. People said don't teach it. But if I can find a young man that can run a slide, we're going to do it.
Well, why couldn't a young man run the slide? I mean, a lot of them play basketball. It's essentially a basketball move.
It's taboo. It's a women's volleyball only run slides, but those times have changed now because now you're seeing you can jump higher, you can hit harder. At the time, it worked for us because we didn't have a D-ball attacker that could score a ton of points. So I'm like, we have to figure something out. And he was a basketball kid that I recruited him because he could run off of 1 foot. And now you see a lot more college teams running slides, but a lot of teams also have great D-ball attackers. So the taboo part is going away, but it's not so much women's volleyball anymore.
Uh-huh. You know, I went in and looked at the stats, the NCAA stats for men's volleyball. And for some of our listeners that aren't familiar with NCAA Division I volleyball, it's a combination of Division I teams and Division II teams. I believe there's 28 Division I and 32 Division II. But they all have the same number of scholarships. Up to this point, they've had 4.5 scholarships that can be divided, which is a real advantage if you're a Division II school, because that's not true in women's sport. They have fewer scholarships. But the issue of a woman coaching men, to me, is a non-issue. What's the issue is I don't understand why there haven't been hundreds more. I can think of 50 women that I know that could go be successful coaches in men's sports. And it seems while we've made progress and opportunities in playing, there ought to be female coaches coaching in the NBA. There ought to be the best basketball coach we ever had at the University of Nebraska was Connie Iori, who was the women's basketball coach. We haven't had anybody approach her success or her passion for the job. So is that frustrating for you, or do you just not spend any energy on it?
It's extremely frustrating because I'd probably say the first 3 years, just breaking in, I was mistaken for someone's mom, or I didn't play men's volleyball, but I'm like, well, I did have a successful Division I volleyball career. I was a good player. Having parents question, how would you handle my son? And I'm like, how would your son handle me? I'm in charge. Or have people kind of placate you and be like, oh, that's so sweet. Like, who's really in charge? Or having refs walk around you. And I think if you'd ask anyone, they would say I'm a tough cookie. I don't take any crap off of anybody. And I had to kind of make a name for myself I used to dress up everywhere I went. Recruiting, when the guys were wearing golf shorts and polos, I'm wearing heels, and I'm going to make sure you see me. And then that opened the door for me to just ask questions of like, oh, where's your school? And the school wasn't like, the team wasn't great yet. But that opened doors for me just to create conversation and kind of put my ego aside of, you don't know me. I used to have my male assistant stand next to me so guys would talk to me. And it's come a long way since then. Mary DeJute was the head coach at Belmont Abbey. She was the first female coach in men's volleyball for men's D1-2. And then when I think she retired, then it was me. And it was like, all right, well, I don't know who to reach out to at this point in time. All my mentors are men. And they just say, stay steadfast, believe in who you are. Even coaching a lot at USA at the beginning, I would have some of the best recruits in the country try to back me down, even though they weren't coming to my school, but I would assert dominance very quickly. And it was like, oh, she means business. And that's, I have been fortunate to being put in some great situations by numerous coaches to let me shine and tell my story to these young athletes, where now you're seeing more club players being coached by women, where it's not an anomaly. There's more high school coaches that are extremely successful. So now by the time they get to me, it's not a shock anymore. And a lot of the guys that I recruit come from matriarchal homes, or their parents are very equal in that sense. But it's frustrating. There should be a lot more, but then the great ones that we have, I hate to say, they go back to the women's game, where I feel men's volleyball is more about relationships. It is a business, obviously, but there's less of us, so there's more of a fraternity. And when they say Saturdays are for the boys, I'm one of the boys. I'm the king, not the queen. This is how this works.
We had a ruling on, I guess, the future of NCAA sport. And I know it appears in women's volleyball that there's going to be a roster limitation of 18 players. And how is this going to affect men's volleyball? Are scholarship opportunities going to change? Are roster size going to change?
It's going to be different all over the board. Where Ohio State is in our conference, and they are down to I think 16 or 17 young men. Where a lot of the Long Beaches, the Pepperdines, the UCLA's, they've always kind of dealt in some semblance of roster limits. Where now it's beneficial for the Division twos that are entering, where young men are not finding homes at you know their preferred school, and they want to compete at the highest level. Now they're looking at me. Now they're looking at other institutions where they're just trying to find an opportunity to compete, to find a home. That's the positive side for the Division two schools that competing at Division one level, but it's going to be a tough landscape with GCU shutting down. That makes me nervous about, is there going to be another historical program or another famed program that's going to close their doors because of the settlement, where we're now cutting out a team and actually having an opportunity to have new ones. Is that going to close the door for that as well? But it'll benefit us. I have 25 guys in my roster this year. I usually hold around 20 to 22, and that's because of the transfer portal.
But there'll be no limitation on that. If you want to have 25 next year, you could.
Yes, not for the Division two schools. But the hindrance for us is that if hypothetically Hawaii has 8 scholarships, I'm still at 4.5. We are not in those. We're not monetarily like benefiting from that. It's just I can house more guys, and I'm still within the 4.5 limitations. We're not saying they're going to get a full 18, but if they get 6, that's still an advantage.
Oh, okay. When I began a program at a junior college in North Carolina, and I made the commitment not to cut the first year, there was nobody who'd ever played organized sport. So all 25 women who came out, I just felt they need to have this opportunity. Do you carry 25 because you feel it's such a positive thing for those people, those young men? Because you have a limited number of subs compared to women's volleyball. So basically, you're playing 7 or 8 players sometimes, where in women's volleyball with 15 subs in libero, it's almost free substitution. Do the benefits outweigh the potential negatives of having 15 guys on a roster that are never going to see the court?
I think there's 2 answers to this. Where the lowest number of guys I had on the roster was 18, and I felt like that was a perfect number. But that 18 turned quickly to 12 based off of the injury year in class. Where I do think 25 is quite a few, but we're not counting in the true freshmen that need to develop, that need to potentially redshirt. We are losing quite a bit after this current class, where instead of recruiting 10 guys next year, I am returning, an excessive amount. I think about that as well, but relationships are huge to me. That's why we have great retention here. And that is something that I'm thinking about in this challenge of, we travel roughly 15 or 16. We always have a few injuries. You can't, take that into account, but making sure, and happy is a relative term, making sure that these 25 young men feel seen, feel appreciated, and feel cared for. I'm not going to use the word happy because we're not going to be happy in every aspect of our lives, but as long as they can feel heard and seen, I feel really good about my job.
Nickie, I'm going to share something here that probably isn't true, but I have the sense, I had a sense when I was in college that guys were more likely to want to be a part of a team even if they weren't,
Yeah,
the guy. Is that accurate?
it's accurate for us. I can't speak for everyone else, but we have created such a tight knit community where I did this kind of retention, retention dive in of my program. And, I guess good retention is anywhere from 20 to 40%. Or over the past 12 seasons, we're at a 34% retention rate. And I've had 29 guys leave the program. And I can count every single one of those guys, why they left, when they left, what was the reason they left. And out of the 29 guys, I had maybe 3 leave disgruntled. And I feel really great about that because they have the autonomy here to come in and cuss me to high heaven and tell me that I'm wrong and tell me how they feel and get it off their chest. And then I'm like, are we ready to talk now? Now we have choices to make. You have signed up for a commitment. Are you in? Or I can help you find a new home. But we want you here. This is going to be hard work and we're trying to build something. We finally reached our first championship milestone. But they enjoy the camaraderie, the family. Our guys don't live with other athletes on campus very much. It's volleyball or bust. It's us versus everyone else. And that's the only way I want it. So I'm hoping other institutions are like that, but I know for a fact they're my guys. They're here for each other. They're here for me. And if they leave, it's a pretty good reason. And then we always say, once a Bearcat, always a Bearcat. They still claim McKendree, which I'm happy for. So I brothers.
I'm not even sure what a Bearcat is. I know Oscar Robertson was a Bearcat. That's
It's not pretty. It's not a large badger cat looking thing. That's not.
Has McKendree always been the Bearcat, or did they change mascots at some point?
They've always been the Bearcats. We are the oldest institution in Illinois, 1820.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. You know, kind of what you're doing reminds me when I entered coaching. Mick Haley was the coach at Kellogg Community College, and he coached both the men and the women. And sometimes they would even stay for a third year of junior college, giving it up for, because back then some junior colleges were better than 4-year schools. But I can remember there was a strong sense of family between the men's teams and the women's teams, and a sense of community. 6 substitutions and a libero, and the libero doesn't get to serve. So there's when I've watched men's volleyball, it looks like the overwhelming a higher percentage of men are jump serving with a topspin jump serve. And I'm curious that as I see people trying to pass difficult float serves in women's volleyball, that it's possible somebody could be pretty good passing a topspin jump serve that wouldn't be very good at passing a tough float serve. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. So I did a USA camp a couple of years ago, and now they're talking about no hand passing, and I called it Float Serve Nation. I did not allow the 16 to 18-year-old to spin serve. My hot take is that not everyone knows how to teach an effective float serve, where flat, clean, fast, where a lot of guys are hand passing balls and they're enamored with a spin serve. Well, but I'm like, your spin serve's 35 miles an hour. That's a free ball. That's not going to do anything for anyone. Where I think there's a lot more, especially middles. There's a lot of setters that have really nice float serves. It's just who's going to take the time out. Because I can remember being a little girl learning how to float serve in a 5th grade gym. No one's doing that at the club level, or, I don't want to speak out of turn, but having these young men float serve at that age would be huge, huge. But, it's the women's and men's volleyball difference, where there's not a lot of guys that are out here practicing how to pass float serves.
Right.
No, especially not with their platform.
Yeah. When I looked at the stats for the top teams in the country and compare them with the stats in women's volleyball, if you're competing, say, for a top 7 or 8 spot, the earned points per set are around 18.5. But when I look at men's volleyball, it's closer to 16. Okay, so, and people would be shocked. There, from a points earned standpoint, more points are earned in blocking in women's volleyball than in men's volleyball. But I would argue that blocking is more important in men's volleyball than women's volleyball. I mean, it seems that doesn't make sense, but somebody's leading the country with two and a half blocks per set in men's volleyball. There's several teams that are above 3 in women's volleyball. Yet, if you don't have a big block in men's volleyball, and teams just score out of system.
Yes.
So, yeah, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't looked at the statistics.
It's going back to the practice plan of women's and men's volleyball. I went to kind of a coaches roundtable session of, why aren't more women's programs taking swings out of system? They're trying to give this ball away. They're trying to put it in play, and that is the bread and butter of the men's game. Like this coming fall, our first week of practice, we're not going to swing at any tempo balls. It's how to set out a system, high hands out of system, attack solutions, because there's too many guys that can point score from behind the baseline that are putting guys in an out of system situation where you can't do it. That's not going to work. We're not the biggest team. We're not the strongest team, but we do get creative in trying to find ways to score. We were last year we were the nation's best defensive team. This year we were the second best defensive team in the country. Where if we can get positive touches on the block, we can defend and we can terminate out of system. That's how it works for us. Women's volleyball, I think watching Nebraska, they're taking swings out of system. Texas, they're taking swings out of system. You're starting to see a kind of a transformative game of some of the more physical women's teams where they're not giving these balls away. They're taking rips, trying to score points. And I love to see it because I challenge some of my women's volleyball counterparts of like, you're basically coaching a men's athlete. What they say, Madison Skinner can touch like 10-8
right
on a women's net. She's going to take a rip. You have the athletes. I coached a collegiate national team in 2018, and Yasi Presley was a freshman, and I was like, "Yep, she can take an out of system swing. Why are you not triple blocking? You're doing it all." And it's getting coaches out of the statistics of it, of like, well, here's the hitting percentage of this, and here, and just giving it a really big try of give it a season, give it a spring of just taking out of system rips, and I just feel like it would just transform some of these teams.
When you became a head coach, you were a middle attacker, middle blocker at West Virginia. Where did you go to learn how to train a setter?
Anybody that would talk to me. Because I'm like, I can teach blocking, I can teach defense, I can even teach passing. I can hear Mitch, but those first couple of years, I never said no to anything. I went to any camp I could go to. I would talk to anyone, ABCA, any setting skills, anything. I would just ask questions, watch videos, just being a student of the game, because that was something where I felt deficient. Because all my teams have traditionally been really great block and defense teams. But offensively, I just needed to know more. But anybody that wants to talk to me, I'm in. But I talk to our setters now, which is kind of funny. I've kind of dove into it because I feel much better versed in our offense right now.
Uh-huh. What if you could sit down and talk to anybody in the country that you don't know that's in the volleyball world, and just sit down, have a cup of coffee with them and talk about some area that you have interest in the sport, who would that be?
Oh gosh. You know what? I will say this is I feel very cliche. Coach Katie, Penn State, I want to talk to you. She commented on something I posted, and I'm like, oh my God, royalty is just to watch, not necessarily skill based, but I think there's some big nuances. Her assistant, Michael Hinchy, played at Ohio State. I know him really well. And I know there's some nuances that they're doing that I'm like, give me all of your secrets. I actually have 2 young men right now working at Nebraska camp, and they're loving it, and they're updating me every day. And Jalen Reyes is a good friend of mine, and I'm like, tell me all your secrets. give me all of the things. So it's having the opportunity of picking people's brains, especially even being on the board at the AVCA, talking to Keegan about culture when he was at Washington, or
Yeah.
having the opportunity to just sit with anyone. But Coach Katie, I love you.
Yeah.
Call me.
Yeah, she did a wonderful job. And Jalen is a natural relator. I don't know him well. I've had him on a podcast, but I don't, you can just watch him during a match and see he genuinely enjoys people. He comes from a family that enjoys people.
Mhm.
Um, well, you've had several highs over the last several years. I'm sure things changed. I remember in my second year, Nebraska had never beaten Linda Dollar and Southwest Missouri State. And we did the second year to win regionals. I felt different. The kids felt different. It, and my guess is when you beat Ohio State, when you beat Ball State, when you beat Arnie Ball's team at IPU Fort Wayne, Loyola, those were all stepping stones. And then this last year, there was a point in the season where you won 12 consecutive matches in men's volleyball. That's hard to do. How did you have to be very consistent to do that. You have to win even when you're not at your best. And that's one of the signs of a really good program, when they go out there and they're not in the zone and they still find a way to win. How did you sense any change in mindset as the team went through that stretch?
Yes, actually, I purposely try to schedule pretty tough every year. Where we went out to Hawaii, I was extremely happy with how we competed. UC San Diego was a tough one, and we had Long Beach at home, and I was just expecting to compete, and we didn't. We had a packed gym. We rolled over. Obviously, they won the national championship, and I was very actually sad about my standard that I was setting. We had a great preseason, a great fall, and how did I not lead them to water to compete? And I'm a military book reader, um, and I read a book about Navy SEALs and how it applies to life, and and I was like, no more music. I'm not a music person in the morning on the way home, but I'm listening to this podcast, getting juiced up, ready to go, and after that point, I'm like, I'm here to kick your guy's butt, and I'm no longer, because I would say, like, I'm going to meet you where you're at. If you're at 60%, I'm going to meet you at 60%. And that is not a Mitch Jacobs standard. You're going to meet me where I'm at. And I kind of lost sight of that, because I was happy with how we were doing. And I said, no more. You're meeting me where I'm at. I'm at the standard. And from that point forward, and I say this a lot, I'm like it or not, you're going to like it. And if you don't like it, there's the door. Because we're doing this together. We kind of changed some vernacular of how we talk about our team. We don't say B side anymore. B side is a negative connotation here of you're not worth much, and we call it the scout team, because scout team, you're preparing us for war. You're preparing us for battle, and we use those kind of those words a lot of they're coming in here to take our stuff. They're coming here to. I said a lot more expletives with the guys, but. They're coming here to take your home. We are trying to win this battle. We wrote MEBA Champs on the board. Or actually, our group me it's called Real MEBA Champs, and we are fighting. And I remember our first kind of fit set game, and so let's say, what restaurant do you not like? What is something that you really don't like? Give me a food you don't like.
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to you. This is a part of the story. What do you give me a food that you really hate?
Probably some mixture of beets and sauerkraut.
Okay, so I would make the guys come in every day, and I say, I love beets. And I'm like, Harry, don't you love beets? He's like, yeah, I love beets. And we started doing certain drills that they hate. They hate force setting. It's a not a system drill. And I'm like, I love force setting. You love force setting? And I would go around the room, and then we play a 5-set match, and I hear one of the guys go, I effing love fifth sets. And they start talking to each other. And they're like, I love fifth sets. And I'm like, I actually believe they love fifth sets. And I felt like I get the chills thinking about it right now. And we won our first fifth set. And anytime we were going 5, we just got stronger. And they firmly, like, wholeheartedly, there's nothing you can do to us. We are a fifth set team. We are going to fight, and we are not afraid. Even we lost. Granted, we lost. I think that was probably the first fifth set we lost at Ohio State. We were on the almost on the reverse sweep comeback, and they're like, we love fifth sets, and they didn't back down. They're built. They were war war built. They were built for battle, and I could be prouder. But that's also carrying over, like, how can we replicate that? Of hard work is the cornerstone of this program. That's how we got here. I lost sight of it. I found it back. I got some good audiobooks to fire me up in the morning and things I already believed in. But I also take a lot of ownership into how our leaders are in the gym, and if they aren't behaving in a manner that's fitting of a leader or a captain, that's on me. I'm the head of the snake. Um, as you mentioned, I'm very vulnerable. I'm not afraid to tell them I'm wrong, or I made a mistake, or I allowed something to happen. That goes a long way with our team. And I think a lot of coaches think they have to be dictators. I am, in a sense, where I make decisions, but I am not perfect. I am an imperfect coach. I'm an imperfect creature. And that's how we do things here. But if you don't like it, they love Jimmy John's here. Let's just say it. They love it so much. Anywhere Coach Nickie wants to eat, that's how it works. So you better start loving beets and sauerkraut. That's how it goes.
Do they still say hello to you when you walk in Jimmy John's?
Yes.
When that franchise opened in Fort Collins, I walked in and I was the only one there, and these 8 guys started saying hello to me. I turned around and walked out. I just
It's here. But now we even had the Marines in the fall. We're going to do it again. And I used to, Mitch Jacobs was my coach. He's still on my phone as coach, and it's been 20 years. And they would start addressing me as yes coach. And I'm like, I am not Mitch Jacobs, but I like this. So now it's yes coach. It is, here we are. The Marines, it's a path that I was already in. I love that. I loved it. I was mentioning, I listened to Extreme Ownership, and it kind of jump started our 12-game streak, and I'm a big believer.
Yeah. I'm wondering if men's volleyball would be more popular if it was a more diverse sport.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that, when I started coaching, I felt the one advantage we had in Nebraska was that in Southern California in 1977, the top programs were UCLA, USC, San Diego State, Santa Barbara. And I felt it was not so much a sport as a lifestyle, the people on the beach having fun. And we had the advantage of winter and going in and approaching it differently. And that, with the most athletic people we could find, and training them. And we weren't affected by that aura around the beach. But to me, I would like to see more diverse and even better athletes in men's volleyball. Is there, you chose volleyball over basketball, even though you felt you were a better basketball player. Are we approaching the point where there's going to be a male that could play professionally and he chooses volleyball?
I would love to say it, but I think so. Some of these kids are so materialistic of there's money in collegiate basketball. I think that men's volleyball has some human interest stories that we're not diving into to draw attention.
For example,
I think the Moni Nikolov hype that was this year was all worth it, but how mainstream are we making it, right? Like, you could start with the man has an 84-mile-an-hour serve and he's just turned 18, and he's coming from this family. Larry Rather at Fort Valley State, leading a program in HBCU, you know, doing things differently, just human interest. I never talk about myself, but I'm like, how many women are coaching men's volleyball? I do a lot, but how are we bringing that to the mainstream? There's so many different things that way that, you know, people might not know. My boyfriend, he played Division I basketball at Cal State Fullerton, never knew anything about volleyball. When we started dating, he was sitting in the front of the crowd and he's like, if people could just get in front of the sport and see it at face value, you're going to have believers. Because these young men could have played baseball, they could have played basketball, they could have done anything, but their niche was volleyball. You know, I had a young man who was in that first class. He said, I was a mediocre baseball player. I was 6'6". I was a mediocre basketball player. I didn't really like contact, but volleyball is just where I thrived. How are we getting people in the front row of these seats to see these guys touching 11, 12 feet? You know, Cooper Robinson touches over 12 feet. Did anybody know that? He's at UCLA. It's a primetime school. You know, there's so many different things that I could talk about and just different individuals, but we don't know. You know, we're not getting that pub. And how are we doing that?
When you look to the immediate future, your goal for the men's program next year, is it your goal, or does the team get together and say, is there some collaborative discussion? But in your own mind, you know where you're moving toward. What's the next cone that you want to pass?
I put in our team, I have all of the check marks of the program. First, you know, thanks Arnie, thanks Coach Ball, we got our first conference win. That's who was our first conference win. They were first ranked win, first hosting MIVA tournament, first time beating each of the teams. You know, first conference championship, that is now checked off. We don't want to be co-champs. We want to be regular season champs. Now it's tournament champs. That tournament champs means you go to the NCAA tournament. NCAA tournament means you got to win a game, you know, so on and so forth. So we're taking the milestones as is, but this championship this year has made them like, this is possible. We are not the stepchild of our conference anymore. We're not, we belong here. They've garnered respect for their play. And this is the same team that was 1-13 2 years ago that no one left. And we've already hit milestones where we were the first 6 to beat a 3 seed in the tournament. We were the first 7 to beat a 2 seed in the tournament. You know, we've done all these things and fought back, but now we don't want to share a part of the title. We want the title. And that's not going to be easy. We want to win the tournament. You know, I always say, I'm tired of being a bridesmaid. I want to be a bride. I want to do it.
And now I'm going to move to a tougher question, but maybe more important. How has your sense of purpose evolved?
I've had opportunities to leave here, to leave my institution. And I'm the hot take friend of, you know, people call me and say like, hey, I'm considering a job. And, you know, and the first thing I ask is, are you happy? Are you happy where you're at? Can you feed your family? And I've had plenty of people say like, you can do so much more. You can do more in some bigger school and do a bigger arena. And my purpose are these kids. My purpose is I'm an athletic director now as a part of my title. I'm going to leave this university better than I found it. I'm creating policy. I'm one of the most senior women on campus. I have the ear of the president, who was a basketball player here at McKendree, is now having dreams about spiking balls instead of dunking them. You know, those are things that are important to me. I'm not looking over my shoulder at work. I feel supported. You know, my purpose is, am I creating other opportunities for other women out here telling my story? I'm not a spring chicken anymore, as much as I want to believe it. But no, it hasn't really changed. It's evolved a little bit. I feel a little more sure, well, I guess you would say a lot more sure of myself in my journey. But it makes me feel I'm on the right path, and that path is leading to people. My path is leading to relationships. My path is, I call it my Nick Saban coaching tree. I got a lot of coaches out there that have come under my wing that are crushing it right now. That's another part of my purpose of my relationships. And I think that's what I'm supposed to do. I have to, my ego was checked a long time ago about saying I'm important if I only coach at, University of Illinois. I wanted to go there so bad as a young girl, but too small. Don Harden, too small. But that doesn't mean that I'm not a good coach because I don't have that on my shirt. I'm equal. I'm an equal in those rooms. I'm an equal in that environment, and I want to show other kind of small schools or people. Travis at Western Kentucky is a huge idol of mine because that's someone that has stayed the course, created something of his own, and just longevity and happiness meant a lot more to him than notoriety. Granted, teams are great, but now his son's playing. He's a starting libero at Ohio State, and I almost cried when he acknowledged me, and I'm like, oh my God, Travis Hudson is talking to me. He knows who I am. And I fangirl. I'm starstruck. But that's the point. People are the point. And I think there's a lot of coaches out here that are losing sight of the people that their kids, as angry as they get at me for not playing or not liking what I say, they are kids. Big kids. 6'8", but kids nonetheless.
Well, what I hear is your purpose is relationships, and you've earned your confidence, you've earned your influence, and those two things in particular mean that you can leverage those things into impacting people in even more ways. I want to congratulate you on your journey to this point, and I look forward to seeing what you and McKendree do in the future. I also want to thank Brad Black and HumanX. Without them, we couldn't bring exceptional people onto the podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next time. Thank you, Coach Sanlin.
Thank you.
Inside the Coaching Mind is presented by HumanX Ventures and is pleased to be a part of the Learfield Varsity Podcast Network. If you're on Facebook, look for the Inside the Coaching Mind group and join a vibrant discussion of volleyball and leadership. TerryPettit.com is where you'll find Terry's books, writings, and downloads, as well as subscription links for all your podcast apps.